Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Desi Campbell, and I'm excited to be with you on tonight on Let's Talk Genealogy. I have two of my ancestry DNA cousins tonight, and we're going to be talking about the migration of African American slaves from Cumberland / Harnett County, North Carolina, to Wayne and Newton County, Mississippi, in the 1850s to 1870s. And with the use of ancestry DNA, we have been able to reconnect our families back together over 150 plus years later. I will start by allowing them to introduce themselves and telling us a little bit about themselves.
Hello, I am Dawn Wright. I am a Buckatona, Mississippi native. I now live in Meridian, Mississippi. What I do in the past for 16 years, I was a inpatient and outpatient mental health care professional, a therapist, psychologist, associate. And for the past 11 years, I have been a full-time community college instructor teaching psychology. And during that time, I also met the Brian Hayes, and we became best friends and later learned that we are also related. And so I have just have an amazing, insatiable appetite for genealogy and American history as well.
All right.
Hello, I'm Brian Hayes, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. Pretty much lifelong resident, and I'm an educator for the Chicago Public School System. When Don and I connected, it was very interesting because I found someone whose passion and enthusiasm matched my own. And for the topic that we'll be discussing, that's something that you really need to get you through the difficult times that you may encounter doing historical research.
Yes. So what is interesting about these two guests of mine is both of them are my DNA cousins. I met Brian probably 3 or 4 years, maybe 4 years ago.
Oh, no. It was 2014.
It's been that long?
Yes.
Like, wow.
Yes.
Okay, so I met Brian in 2014 through DNA. We are very closely connected through DNA, and we kind of figured that out, which we'll talk about that later. I met Don probably maybe 2 years ago.
Right.
We were a DNA match on Ancestry, and then we weren't a DNA match. And then we were a match on GEDmatch. And then next thing I know, probably about 2 months ago, we talked, and her mother's DNA had matched with quite a few of my relatives that are connected to me from the North Carolina connection. So our show tonight, we're going to talk about the migration from Harnett / Cumberland County, North Carolina, to Wayne County, well, by way of Alabama, to Wayne County, Mississippi, and to Newton County, Mississippi. All right. He's briefly explained the connection to families in North Carolina through the use of DNA. So Brian, we'll let you go first.
That's a great question because the first identifiable DNA match that I had located in North Carolina was you. And because of the relatively closeness of the match, that's why I reached out to you on Ancestry, because all the research that I had done, nothing had come up about North Carolina, even though as a historian and understanding migration patterns and slavery, that I should have known that there would be some sort of North Carolina connection. It was simply mind-blowing that there was such a close relationship there. And the oddity is the only documented person I had in the family tree at that time, which was probably 50,000 people, was my great-great-great-grandmother, Matilda McClain Ramsey.
All right. Dawn, who has a very interesting story.
Yes, I call my story tragically, or I identified the story as being tragically beautiful. One, because it does have some darkness to it, but I don't like to focus on the darkness. I like to bring out the light that comes from the darkness. So the earliest relative that I have with North Carolina is Thomas Clinch Gray from Duplin, North Carolina, Duplin County, North Carolina. And then we have Henry Harry Gray, who was born in about 1818, and he passed in 1905. So Henry Harry Gray is my third great grandfather. He has children with Daphne Gray, a woman who he enslaved in Wayne County in the Pleasant Grove community. And what's interesting about that, and a very profound message for me, is that Henry Harry Gray not only has children with his wife and Daphne, but Daphne Gray, who is my third great grandmother, who was enslaved by Henry Harry Gray, has children with another man on the Chapman plantation that is near the Gray plantation in Wayne County. So she has children, oddly enough, with a Henry Chapman. And through Brian, I've met another DNA relative, and that is Sebastian, who is a descendant of Henry Chapman's child, Scott Chapman. So again, the relationship with Brian, more people working together, you included, the more we include others with the DNA matches, the documentation, meeting other people, we just have this amazing experience. And so the DNA matches, the documentation, the tools like Ancestry, GEDmatch, all of it plays a very integral part in us finding out more about who we are.
What's interesting is she talked about the Chapman family. Well, one of me and Brian's relatives, which was Lucy McClain. She may have been Lucy McNeil, but because her mother was her mother was a McClain. Jenny and Joe McClain had a daughter named Lucy. So somehow Lucy got to Wayne County, Mississippi. No, was it Newton County, Mississippi? She married a Chapman. All right, so back to Brian. Brian, can you tell us something about Matilda McClain?
Ooh.
That should be.
It's a great question, because today is what, June 2nd, 2020, and so 10 years ago today, I had no idea that the lady existed. I mean, you think about ancestors. Yes, there would have been someone, but there was no name to put to these people. And so, with research and finding out that, she was born in North Carolina and, winding up in Sumter County, Alabama, Kemper County, Mississippi, even today, I still haven't figured out how she got down there. I know that it wasn't voluntary. And so I haven't been able to find the people who were responsible for her being taken from her family and, her winding up in those areas and marrying my great-great-great-grandfather, Minor Ramsey. And sometime around 1892, they and their 3 children deciding to settle in Don's hometown of Buckatown, Mississippi.
Okay. All right. Don, can you talk to us a little bit about your DNA matches through the Poe family? And I know that they somehow came out of South Carolina. And I know that, well, I think that there was some kind of slave trading place right across the border from Robeson County, that in Dillon, South Carolina, that in Chesterfield, South Carolina. I think that that's where most of our slaves that ended up in Alabama and Mississippi, I think they were sold in South Carolina. Okay.
Well, the Poe family, that's another amazing story. We have so many amazing stories when you start digging into the history. The city or town rather, it's the population is about 1,200 people. We've moved up from 900. Woohoo! So, um, so the Buckatona is a Choctaw. Is Choctaw for basket weaver by the creek, Buckatona. Basket weaver by the creek. The Native Americans used to make these baskets where they would catch these fish and trap them. So hence the name Buckatona. It was founded by Alexander Poe and his brother. And we studied so much about our history. Brian, chime in if I'm getting sketchy here. So we have the Poes had a large number of enslaved people. My DNA has connected with a number of those people. Aside from my Loper DNA matches, which I have, when you go through lines on Ancestry, it's the Loper is about 240, my largest through lines match. But with the Poes, it's about 60. With the largest DNA connection matches. So it's been a profound experience with the DNA matches, the documentation, and putting this beautiful puzzle together and finding out that you connected with people who live right down the street from you that you grew up with and you never knew that you were related to.
All right. Can you tell us, Brian, just tell us a little bit what your connection is from Matilda on down to my family?
Okay, well, let me work backwards. My father, Harold Lafayette Hayes Jr., is Matilda's great-great-grandson. My grandmother, Lee Ellen White Hayes, is Matilda's great-granddaughter. My great-grandmother, Marie Gandy White, is Matilda's granddaughter. And Matilda's daughter and Florence's mother is Florence Ramsey Gandy. And so based on the analysis that we've been doing, and I forget the name. I don't know if it's Lucy or another one.
Letty. It's Letty.
Just finding out the documentation in North Carolina and the number of years that you and others have been researched. I mean, it really blew my mind, because one of the oddities about research is that you often think that you're in it alone. Mm-hmm. No one cares about what it is that you're doing, and you find yourself spending a lot of time with others who share that same passion. And so because there are only 24 hours in a day, mm-hmm. as a researcher, you're stealing time from somewhere. Sometimes it can be your job. Sometimes it's time with your family. And so I recall several years ago, my daughter, who just completed her sophomore year at American University, mentioned that I had been working on this since she had gotten out of 4th grade.
Wow.
And so, I blink and 10 years has passed. And so that's almost 20% of my life. And it's been a very, very quick ride. But, in regard to Matilda and those various DNA connections that I had through North Carolina, the difficulty I was having is that all the other relatives that I knew of, as well as those I have been able to identify, who were descendants of Matilda, I couldn't get anyone to do any DNA testing to help us confirm at that point what was a theory. And I remember, you know, it wasn't me, it was you who had made the connection, because you had mentioned the names McNeil and McClain.
Mm-hmm.
And Matilda died 2 years after her daughter Florence. And so Matilda put on Florence's death certificate that her name was Matilda McClain and she was from North Carolina. Whereas when Matilda died in 1920, her surviving child, Archie Ramsey, all he put was that she was from North Carolina, and he didn't seem to have any knowledge about her parents. And so, you know, you don't want anyone to pass, but in a situation like mine, it was very, very fortunate that the mother outlived the daughter,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in that she was able to affix her name. And, you know, I like to tell people that documentation beats conversation all the time. And if anyone would have known what their name was, it was Matilda.
All right, Don, just briefly tell us about your connection to the Chapmans, since that's one of the connections to North Carolina.
Okay, I had the wonderful privilege during the preparation for the funeral services for my mother. I just like, this is so fresh. My mother passed February 27th of this year. My Chapman relative was actually is actually the funeral home owner. So Chapman, by way of the Robinsons West. So my second great grandmother on my maternal side was actually owned by a Chapman plantation owner. Her name was Betty Chapman West, and she married Napoleon Robinson. So it's very interesting. She was also owned by the West, some West plantation owners as well. So they had actually a man by the name of Roscoe Pickett had done some extensive research, and so I have that book that I immediately ask Leo Turner Jr. to copy the entire book. So I took it and I got it Xeroxed, and I have that all 398 pages, and I've yet to include all of that information. But I could have cried when he gave me the book. One, that he was so generous to share it with you, and you and Brian can probably speak to. You have some people who think that they are the keepers of all of the information, but when you find those people who are unselfish and realize that history does not belong to one person, you are extremely grateful. So I have a lot of Chapman family to explore, and that at this point, that is one of my least explored lines, and I wish that I could have done much more research before we met tonight, but we can do this again. We have the opportunity.
The interesting thing, we have the Chapmans, we have the Ramseys, we have the McClains, and we have the Gandys. What other names, Brian, am I missing from your line?
Oh, I mean, at this stage, my line has so many. One of the
Well, the main names like Gandy, I know that's a big.
Well, I mean, we're looking at, if the focus is on North Carolina, like I said, the McNeils, the McClains, the Gandys were originally from North Carolina, wound up in South Carolina, and then Alabama and Mississippi. Like I said, there's so many names because every generation you go back, the number of grandparents doubles.
Yeah.
So, this conversation is pertaining to my father's his mother's maternal side, and I've attempted to research all the various branches of my family, and I want to say the only states where I haven't found us enslaved were Virginia, Louisiana, Florida, Kentucky. The remaining Confederate states, my families were all in those states at the conclusion of the Civil War in 1865. And so, it's a veritable map that, all these different things that were going on prior to, doing, and post-slavery, I had family members there.
And one thing I find interesting is what I think is interesting, this is just a hypothesis, between 1855 maybe and 1869 is when a lot of these people left North Carolina. My great-great-grandfather somehow left North Carolina, I'm assuming with the same group that came to Mississippi. His name was Gabriel McNeil, and he left North Carolina. His wife had her last child, was born around 1863. And all of his children, or her children, say that Gabriel McNeil is their father. So I'm assuming he left somewhere between 63 and 69, and probably 63 and 65, because the slavery was still going on. So one census said he came from Alabama. When I found him in Florida, remarried, and with a new name. He was Gabriel McNeil when he was here, but he was Gabriel Backus in Florida. He had 3 or 4 more kids after that. So I'm assuming that he left with Matilda and all the rest of the crowd that went to Alabama.
Right. I want to say when we use the word left, that denotes choice.
Choice, yeah.
And Florida, wow.
Yeah, that's where he died at. We found him in 1900 living with his son. And we found some kind of article that in 1901, 1902, that he had passed away.
I mean, one of the amazing things about that journey from North Carolina to Florida is that despite something like the Civil War, the business of slavery was not interrupted.
Yeah.
People continued the slave trade.
Yes, they did.
Actually, it's interesting. I have a cousin. She's related to me through the family of Matilda's husband, Minor Ramsey. She's my cousin on that side. Her mother's family, I think it's I want to say it's the mother's great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather was a passenger on the last slave ship.
Wow.
That they actually sunk in Mobile. I want to say Mobile Bay in Alabama. And after slavery, the people who were unwilling passengers on that ship, they created a community called Africatown, which still exists to this day.
Wow. All right, so we're gonna wrap this up. Don, I'm gonna ask you to tell us, the listening audience, some encouraging words about research and their family history and the importance of the DNA or doing the DNA.
The importance of family history, especially in this unprecedented time, as Brian spoke about, Clotilda with Kazula Cujo Lewis on the Clotilda slave ship. I have just finished rereading his book through his narrative through Zora Neale Hurston, and she talked in that book. They had a number of interviews, and in her last interview with him, I have since learned that Mr. Cujo Lewis' son was actually killed by the police in 1851. So not only was he sold into slavery, but he was also, when he got here, all of his children died, and one of his children was killed by the police. So the struggles that we have been going through are still the struggles that we need to overcome now. History has given me the identity and the the understanding, the insight, and to know the importance of buying land, knowing that you need not only your surface rights, but what is underneath you, because those are royalties regarding oil, money for that has been taken away from my family through the Chapman, Betty Chapman, West Robinson, that side. So it's just so many things that can enrich your life and make you a better person and know your identity, along with being connected with so many people in the world who share your DNA. So it has been an amazing, profound experience for me, this journey with Brian and so many other people, and you as well.
All right, Brian. Same question.
Oh, the first thing I would do to encourage someone, as I mentioned earlier, it can get tedious, it can get lonesome. Before attempting to do any research, do the DNA testing. I've encountered too many.
Yes,
I've
definitely.
encountered too many people who have spent years and so hundreds or thousands of dollars obtaining documents on the family that they thought was their family, until they did the DNA test and found out that they had basically done a family tree for someone else. The whole process is humbling. I mean, I've been so fortunate to be able to explore my story and find that my story, as a history teacher, this is American history. And as Don said, in light of the things that are going on now, and it's very tragic, and my heart goes out to the families of those who unfortunately end up on the wrong end of the American just us system. But when I look at the documentation and I imagine the sort of things that my ancestors went through, and understanding that not only did they not have a voice, they were not even considered people, that I'm really not in any position to complain about anything. And I know that those things that they were denied, basic things like the opportunity to read, the opportunity to learn how to write, that I would be remiss in not stating that it's embarrassing when we don't take advantage of the opportunities that come along our way. Don mentioned something very important about land ownership. And then I'm looking at the other side in regards to slavery, because one of the things that was so overwhelming to me in the research when I found Minor Ramsey, my connection to that family, learning that 15 years after being freed from slavery in Sumter County, Alabama, Minor Ramsey was an educator in the 1880 census. And so many of his descendants are educators. And so it's like we were touched by something, in receiving that gift. And so I'm not necessarily a religious person, but it's just been it's been so much fun doing this, not only for myself and Don and I collaborating, and then you collaborating with us, but being in a position to help so many other people who took that initial plunge by contacting Ancestry and paying the $99 and $9.95 ship.
Got mine for $59.
Or that, my passion in helping people with this is that I truly believe that a blessing is not a blessing unless you can give it away.
That is so true. That is so, so true. Well, I thank
It's
you.
not religious, Brian. It's spiritual. Amen.
I really appreciate you all coming. I hope that this helps somebody in the future, and that we can continue our research. And Brian, me and you are well on our way to Mississippi. You muted yourself, sir.
I'm sorry. We'll make sure that everyone sees it.
Yes. So we're well on our way to Mississippi. And sometime this summer, we got to go.
Yes.
On our end, we're still trying to, they're attempting to open up, they're trying to open up the society, but we'll see. And then with the protesters. I'm looking at it from a medical standpoint now that we thought that, we had a handle on things, but the number of cases are increasing again. So, who knows in regards to any potential travel opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we can get down there. I really just want to go just to see the place, to be able to see where some of my ancestors may or may not have lived, or to see some of the graveyards, that they may or may not be buried in, or anything like that. To me, that's refreshing. Mm-hmm. It's refreshing, and it's worth the spending the money to do that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for another edition of Let's Talk Genealogy with your host, Desi L. Campbell. Join us next week as we talk about the Holmes story. My grandmother's paternal line from Maple Hill, Pender County, North Carolina. The descendants of Marshall Holmes and Elizabeth James. Until next time, make it a great day or not. The choice is yours.